the Meeples and Miniatures podcast, episode 121, Dreadball Xtreme, with co-host Mike Whitaker and guest Jake Thornton. This show was recorded on Thursday, the 27th of February, 2014.
The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is sponsored by Two Fat Lardies and Coat Dance Paints, and also by the generous donations of you, the listener. Thank you to everyone for your support.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Meeples and Miniatures podcast with me, Neil Shuck. On today's show, we're chatting once again to game designer Jake Thornton. Myself and Mike Whitaker caught up with Jake towards the end of last week, and we talked to Jake about all things Dreadball Xtreme. So during the course of the interview, we chat about the whole background to Dreadball Xtreme and Jake's ideas where it all came from in the first place. We'll talk about some of the differences between Xtreme and the original version of Dreadball, and at one point we even get on to some more fundamental chat about Kickstarter and the way that works and why companies would go down that particular route for funding their projects. It's a really interesting chat, and I hope you really enjoy it. We'll take a quick break. When we come back, I'll be joined by Mike Whitaker, and we'll be chatting to Jake Thornton.
The eagles have gone. Britain lies defenseless in a cruel world. Since the birth of our Lord, it has been 456 years. What sins have we committed to bring this punishment to Britain? I speak, of course, of the Saxons. They came as allies, but now they seek conquest. The lands of the Britons lie ravaged before them. Blood runs red in our island. We need a leader to stand against them. We need a man to bring together the Britons in common cause. We seek a Dux Britanniarum.
Right, that's enough of that. Dux Britanniarum from Two Fat Lardies. They really are very good.
I'm very pleased to welcome back to the show. It almost seems like he's never been away. Jake Thornton, welcome back to Meeples and Miniatures.
Hello, Neil. And hello, Mike, lurking in the background. Look.
Jake, it's great to speak to you again. If you've been, I suppose, hiding under a rock for a week or been somewhere away from any sort of internet connection, you may not have heard that, we're recording this on Thursday the 27th, and last Friday the new Mantic Kickstarter for Dreadball Xtreme launched, and was funded in, was it 39 minutes, Jake?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, because
38, 39.
I understand you were at Mantic HQ for the launch party.
I was, yes. Yeah.
Right, so
I went
did they
down
let
because
you
it's always
press the button?
entertaining. I mean, no, God, no, they wouldn't let me near the computer. You can the button that you press, you can also do all sorts of unfortunate things with it, like delete it next to it. So I don't think they won't let me anywhere near that, and I think I'm quite happy with that. They have trained professionals to do that kind of thing.
Right.
No, I wouldn't want to go anywhere near the bit that can break the whole campaign they've been setting up for weeks. No, thank you. But yes, it was quite fun because there's a real buzz about what's going on, and everyone stops for half an hour and has a look at what's going on, and it's amusing to see people's comments come up and sort of they're almost shouting first as they jump in. It's quite exciting because you never know what's going to happen with Kickstarter. I mean, you hope, because you do the work in advance to see the thing and do the teaser campaigns and sort of try and get the word out there and all of that. Because you do all of that, you hope it's going to start well, but you just can't tell. I mean, there's no way of knowing in advance. It really is a bit of a sort of stressful 26 days or whatever it is, 24 days. This particular one, I think, but because people can come in and leave, and depending on what other Kickstarters there are going on at the time, and when we went live, and there were already 2 sports games out there, and you go, that's really not very good timing for anyone.
No.
But you book these things in advance, you set them all up well in advance of knowing the date, and so we were beavering away. Like Guild Wars went live the day before we did, and that sort of notice, you just there's nothing you can do about it. It's just unfortunate, and at least it's it's not Cool Mini going live with another sports game. That would have been they've gone live with something else. It's one of those things where the Kickstarter campaign is a hugely variable entity, and when it runs and who it runs against or alongside makes a massive difference to the actual outcome. And I think there's been in the past, there's been several Kickstarter campaigns that have failed, not because there was anything intrinsically wrong with them, but because they happened to be up against Zombicide 2 or something like that. Something that was just eating all of the cash anyone in the world had.
Yeah.
So yes, it was interesting.
Now, I must admit, I was thinking back and thinking, it's good grief. It's almost 2 years since we first heard of Dreadball, because it's got to be close to 2 years since the original Dreadball Kickstarter ran, isn't it?
I think it was in the autumn, wasn't it? I think I can't remember, to be honest. We can have a look on Kickstarter. Somebody can have a look on Kickstarter and see what the date was.
That'll be.
I was saying it's all gone past very quickly.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, obviously, we've seen stage releases with the various seasons coming out for Dreadball over the last year, and here we are in 2014, and then all of a sudden we have new Kickstarter, and Dreadball Xtreme arrives. Now, I noticed on a post that you put onto your blog today that you were saying, well, Dreadball Xtreme was there right at the very start. So, at what point in your concept with the whole Dreadball game and the Dreadball universe did Dreadball Xtreme actually rear its head for the first time?
Oh, very early on. I mean, when I was originally sort of working out what my sort of concept of the whole thing was, it was already in there. So before I even wrote the rules, it was already in place as part of the background story. In terms of details, I was looking at a post I wrote on Quirkworthy that came out during the Kickstarter, the first Kickstarter, about Dreadball Xtreme, and it was what I thought Dreadball Xtreme might be. That was like, far, far away at the time, but I was sort of writing down my ideas, and it's been interesting to see how much of that has stayed. I mean, basically, the bulk of it is the same as that. I mean, details have been changed, names have been changed, the odd term has been changed, but the core concepts have remained very much the same. And I think it's partly because when I design stuff, I kind of have an image in my head of what I want to happen, or what I imagine is happening, that I'm making a model of, as it were. So I'm kind of making a game of the movie in my head, if you see what I mean. So it's a case of it's a case of that was always part of the movie, as it were. It was just a case of we were able to to make part one at the time. I mean, it was mentioned. If you look at the Kickstarter, it's mentioned as something that we do if if the first Kickstarter actually went big enough.
Yeah.
And the very last thing that was done was Blaine as an MVP for Dreadball Xtreme. That was the last thing that happened in the first Kickstarter. So it was always part of the plan from before it was made, as a physical product.
Yeah.
Because the first Kickstarter, the way that worked, and the way the Kickstarter works now is Mantic's had a lot of experience and learned a lot from its mistakes. So this is all rather more work has been done in advance now. It was much less finished when we started the first one.
Yeah.
But yes, it's been in since the very beginning.
Right, okay. So, for those people who have never heard of Xtreme or have only just heard the phrase, can you give an impression of what Xtreme actually is and how it sits within the Dreadball universe?
Sure, yeah. Well, you've got... If you think to start with, you've got Dreadball. Dreadball is a big arena game. It's the kind of World Wrestling Federation sort of huge razzmatazz, massive crowds, lots of glitz, lots of glitter, lots of people sort of lots of showmanship and sparkly outfits, and everybody being larger than life and having their own songs. And that's the kind of big American football, Superdome, all this kind of. That is what Dreadball is. It's a really high-end, fancy, 3D projected series. Millions of people stop what they're doing and watch the finals of these things. The Dreadball Xtreme is almost the antithesis of that, because it's the illegal underground fight club sort of version of it. It's run by dodgy characters called sponsors, which is the sort of equivalent of coaches in normal Dreadball. And the archetypical sponsor, if you know the film Snatch, the archetypical sponsor in my head is Bricktop. Okay. If you've seen the film, then you'll know. I mean, he's an unpleasant criminal, sort of gangster fixer. In some ways, he's the one who runs the illegal boxing. He's the one who runs the dog fights. Nobody gets in his way without being crippled for it.
Yeah,
he's just not a nice character. But anyway, the people who run this, and they don't want the police to interfere. They don't want the officials to interfere. They're busy creaming off a nice profit. Thank you very much. And they're running this sport, and. It's like Fight Club in the way that it's underground. Nobody, you don't talk about it. Or it's like, if you imagine the raves people used to organise sort of 20 years ago, when these were sort of they'd get a warehouse and they'd have a rave and it would be shut down by the police.
Yeah. Because
it was illegal. It's that kind of environment. It's that kind of sort of ethos where these are things that are. They're organised among a small group of people who someone who knows someone who knows there's going to be something kicking off, and these are the events you'd go to, and there'd be very little notice for where it was. It would be in a disused warehouse. It would be in an old hangar. It would be these kind of large spaces because you need the big space for the game, but in the margins of town, not in the big shiny glitzy arenas, but somewhere in the margins, somewhere in the disused industrial areas, all that kind of thing. So it's an illegal version. It's an unlicensed and criminal version of the sport. And because it's illegal, because it's a criminal version, this basically leads on to all of the differences that make it a different game. So you've got a situation where you've not, instead of a permanent arena, which is all set up and glossy and shiny in the way it needs to be, you're making ad hoc pitches wherever you can in a hurry. So you haven't got the high-end medical facilities, you haven't got the swanky holographic strike hexes, you haven't got often you haven't got a nice clear area. You've got concrete pillars in the middle of the pitch because you've just cleared part of a warehouse. So the pitch itself becomes a mutable thing. It's not always the same every time, and it's not always set up quite as you might want it perfectly. So there are different possible arenas to play in. So that gives you quite a lot of difference. And the other big difference is the way in which the teams work. Teams aren't the sort of permanent, famous, big household names like the 29ers, because their teams are sort of built around one or other of the sponsors basically arranges for a bunch of players to turn up to play a game.
Yeah.
And that's one of the teams. Now, each of the sponsors moves in different circles, has different people he knows, has different contacts he can call on. So the sponsor that the warden, who's a sponsor who works in the penal system, knows how to get hold of convicts, knows how to move in that circle and get those people cheaply and with efficiently. So he has a team that comprises at its core, starting team from a warden sponsor would be mostly convicts. Blaine, on the other hand, is a sort of interplanetary criminal who deals with all sorts of dubious alien underworld characters, and so his team is based on Asterian pirates. And all the other thing, I mean, you get scientists who know how to do, engineers who can get sort of plagues and mutants. You've got normal mechanical engineers who can build robots, and different people who have different areas of the world, areas of the player base that they can pull from. But in effect, everyone can hire everyone if you've got enough money and enough contacts. So you can start off with, let's say you have the warden who knows a lot about the penal system. He can get convicts cheap. If you wanted to hire an Asterian pirate, well, he doesn't really move in those circles. He doesn't really have any contacts there. But eventually he may be able to get them, but they might cost twice as much as they would cost for Blaine. But he can eventually pull them in. So he can, say, if you find someone who's outside your normal sort of comfort zone, you can get them, but you'll pay a premium for them.
Yeah.
So in a league sense, when you start the game, if you get the game, you'll start off and you'll get a kind of starter team that says, if you want to play convicts, play this team just to start off with, and you don't have to worry about it. You just take what it says and put it on the pitch.
Yeah. And
it's dead simple. If you get into it and you want to tinker about with it, there's a lot more tinkering you can do with Xtreme's system of team building than there is with the exhibition matches in normal Dreadball. Because basically you have an enormous amount of freedom to pick almost anybody within Xtreme, which some people like and some people find intimidating because it's too much choice. But I think it's the sort of thing that really suits a great depth of play in terms of league organisation. Once you get people who've kind of bought into this concept, when they're playing the league, they can tinker away to their heart's content and finesse what they want to play against different people in different ways. And the idea of saying, I know I'm playing robots, so I'll take this kind of team is absolutely central. So you can pick different teams to deal with different people, which should give you much closer kind of matchups. Because if you know who's coming, you can tool up for them.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes. And the third of the two things, is that it's because it's illegal. There's no rules, or there's no rules in the sense that there's no referee to tell you you've broken them, and the way in which you play can be sort of as violent and as underhand as you like. Obviously, the board game has rules, otherwise it wouldn't work. But within the concept of the game, it's an illegal thing. And they've organised it so that there is a certain amount of, if you do this, you score a point. If you do that, you score 2 points. But in terms of rules of not being allowed to tackle people from behind and not being able to, do all sorts of actually most of the shenanigans you are not allowed to do normally in terms of fouls is mitigated in other ways. So you can have as many people as you want on the pitch, but there's a limit to how quickly you can put people on.
Yeah.
So
how much of a challenge is it writing a set of rules for a game with no rules? In the sense of the actual the Dreadball Xtreme is a game with no rules, but you still have to provide a set of game mechanics, I guess, is the distinction, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, well, you've got all of the... I mean, I kept the core of kind of moving and throwing and so on, because a lot of that is... I mean, that's sort of a physical limitation of the creatures involved. They can only go so far, not because they... if they wanted to go further, they still couldn't run any faster. They can want to go at light speed all they want, but they can't run at light speed. So they can only move 5 or 6 or whatever it might be that they move. So there's things like that which are basically the mechanics are reflecting the natural restrictions on their own physical limitations. So the ability to throw the ball, for example, the range on that is to do with the mechanics of actually physically throwing it and the way in which the ball works, not because you're deliberately not throwing it for as far as you could. So what I did was basically a lot of the mechanics are simply working out a way of describing on the board how people would interact with each other in a kind of physical sense. A lot of the rules that are not there, as it were, are restrictions on not punching people from behind, not having too many people on the pitch, not stopping people moving onto the pitch from their subs bench, that kind of thing, not kicking people when they're down. And actually in this, you're quite encouraged to kick people when they're down. And the way the pitch is set up, if you want to stop someone coming on the pitch by standing in the way, you have to stand on 14 hexes. Or is it 15? But either way, it's too many to practically do, so you can't do that. You can have as many people on the pitch as you like, but you have a limited number of actions. So, of course, then there is a sort of natural cap to that. Which actually is another thing. There's 4 actions in this instead of 5. Normal Dreadball has 5 team actions per rush, and this has only got 4.
Yeah, there's been immediately a lot of comment about that, hasn't there, where people turn around and go, it just isn't enough to do everything. Now, I immediately see, correct me if I'm wrong, what I was kind of thinking, one of the thoughts behind that is potentially the fact that, well, hang on a second, these aren't professional Dreadball players. These are more amateur players, hence why you have a more limited set of actions to do, simply because they aren't as experienced as the people who are playing in the major leagues. Is that where you were coming from, or have I got that completely wrong?
That was one of the ideas I had. That was a sort of conceptual background reason, because part of the idea was that the team action tokens represented the team acting as a group in terms of sort of coordinated plays. So you could do a certain amount of, he's going to pass to him, he's going to slam him out the way, then he's going to do this, and then it's all kind of this interlocking play in the way the teams support each other.
Yeah.
So absolutely, this is a bunch of far less trained, far less organised players who work less efficiently as a team, so should be able to do less of that. But there's another far more practical reason to do it, which is simply that because of the violence is rather more noticeable in this, it's just too dangerous to let people have that many more turns, and it's a way of if what happens normally, what happens quite a lot in Dreadball is people are playing and they kind of go, well, I can do what I want with 4 actions, and then I'll use my last one just to slam someone because I can.
Yeah.
You get this sort of one at the end where people go, oh, and I'll just do this, and it's not actually core to their plan. They're just kind of, doing this because they've got kind of almost like a spare one, or they'll buy a card because I've got a spare one. And with this, what happens if I spend my time trying to score with 4 actions and then thumped you with a 5th, then that will be okay. But the problem is with this, people sometimes spend the first four actions thumping you and then kicking when they're on the floor and giving them a 5th one, letting them have all 5, tends to mean that you've got rather more body bags to carry out, before you get a go, and so cutting down on the cuts down on the time between each person's turn, so it stops more bad things happening in the turnabout, if you see what I mean.
Yes.
Having seen some people down at Club Play Orcs or Terratons, I can't really see the difference.
Well, I think, as I said, you with the difference in Dreadball Xtreme, there's a couple of very important differences. One of them is that you've got, across the board of players, you've got slightly worse armour, or sometimes more than slightly worse armour.
Right.
You've got the strength is less decreased. There are some very seriously dangerous players. There are a number of ways of nobbling the other opponents with the cards and the equipment and so on that comes on those cards. The first two teams, for example, have backstab and threatening as skills, which reduce the defense of the opponent in one case and up the attack of the slam in the other. So we're looking at the dice rolls, and the stats themselves give you more likely to do damage. The armor is less likely to stop it. And when you go down, this is what really ups the kill rate. When you knock someone down and you injure them, they don't get dragged off to the sin bin. They just lie on the floor.
Yeah.
And when they lie on the floor, you can slam them again. And you can do that with a running start.
And it's
running
not
starts, well, yes, they're not illegal because there isn't any way to stop it. Yeah, there's no ref to tell you can't do it. The reason why people don't do running starts normally in Dreadball is because it makes it really obvious they're going to do a foul. So they just stand there and kick them quietly. Running 20 feet to get a run up to boot someone, well, any ref is going to notice that. So, that's why people don't do it. In this, there isn't a ref to care, so people routinely take run-ups to kick people on the floor. And people will lie on the floor until they're dead or they're better. And most of the time, people use spare actions to kick people who are on the floor to make sure they don't get up again. The inability to automatically ping back off the board and then get better means that you suffer quite a lot more casualties. But as I said, people who are intent on damaging have a golden opportunity to just put the boot in, because the people who are on the floor have very few dice. And if you put a couple of threat zones on them, then they have even less dice, often none. So you're just racking up the extra injuries. Yeah. So yes, the body count does. There's lots of little ways of shading the body count more likely, but overall, yes, it does make a big difference. So the turn action, so the team action tokens are reduced so that you don't overwhelm and obliterate half of my team in one rush.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Did this make it quite hard to balance for, obviously with the flavour of the game, you're going to have fewer teams that just rely on flinging the ball around, but I noticed that the alien team's still slightly more throwy around like the Void Sirens they are. Did it actually was this an attempt to balance it so that they weren't completely useless?
Well, they often find with four actions it should be enough for a competent throwing team to score. You shouldn't need 5 actions to score. So that works a bit in their favour. The two teams in the box, the Convicts and the Astarians. The Astarians are very much they're not a thumpy team. They can just about manage if they have to, but they really want to be scoring and winning by a landslide. So if they're playing to win by a landslide, the Convicts again have to do something to try and score, which stops them battering the bejesus out the Astarians, because they're unlikely to be able to wipe out the Astarians before the Astarians win by a landslide.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Simply obliterating the other side takes a bit longer than scoring 7 points. So the Astarians kind of trying to score lots is actually a defensive mechanism for the Astarians, oddly enough, because it forces the Convicts to have to deal with it as a game rather than as a punching match.
Yeah, I can see that.
But yes, it's difficult. It's a difficult balance, and because you can use Dreadball teams in Dreadball Xtreme and Dreadball Extreme players in Dreadball after a fashion. You can use the models, that's fine. In terms of, it's like saying Lucky Logan wouldn't really be in the Dreadball Xtreme arena because that would be his career down the toilet. But you get people who turn up looking like, dressed like Lucky Logan, claiming to be Lucky Logan, who may or may not be Lucky Logan.
Dreadball cosplay.
Well, a bit like that. I mean, but if you think of the whole thing about, are the and it works the other way as well, because if you think of the vermin, for example, and the Zor, are the vermin and the Zor really vermin and really Zor in the main arena? Really? Or are they clones or mind-controlled robots, or who knows what they are? Maybe they are real Zor. Maybe they are, but surely that would be too dangerous. But who knows? So you get to use the teams in the other version, as it were.
Yeah.
But there's always this like kind of, in terms of background and story, there's always this kind of, really? Is that really Lucky Logan? Really? He's slumming it, isn't he? Anyway, yeah, so you'll get things like Dreadball trying to play, and I think the Dreadball will suffer.
Just a bit.
I think the Dreadball are going to get severely battered. But again, you see, if they can rack up the points quickly enough, then they win. End of game. They stop punching you when you score 7 points.
Really?
That becomes... Well, at least we draw a veil over this, because one of the other things is the individual people that make up the teams don't matter. They have no life beyond the team, beyond that game. They don't work. They don't... in a league, it's not the team members who gain experience, and so the team, normally in Dreadball, the team collectively gains experience because the individuals gain experience.
Yeah.
In Extreme, the sponsor gains power, influence, and money. And by having more power, influence, and money, he is able to hire more experienced players.
And this obviously is a major difference when it comes to the league. And actually, it's I know some people were kind of going, "Oh," as soon as that was announced, because that's kind of a major change from an awful lot of sports games when you get into leagues. Because an awful lot of sports games that we've seen before, as soon as you hit leagues, it's all about player development. And obviously, when it comes to Extreme, that counts for nothing or very little.
Well, it's about team development, because the individual... What I think you've got to get your head around is the idea that the individual has a fairly short survival rate.
Yeah.
The chances of you surviving 3 games of Extreme is very, very low. And if you can't survive 3 games of a sport, developing the players is just not a practical way to develop the team.
Not quite, yeah.
You have to come up with... if you want the violence, then... you have to do, and in the violence in that context, whereas the people in the main arena could afford to revive individuals, there just isn't that medical backup in this environment. So, yes, the technology exists in the planet, but not in that place at that time when he's lying on the concrete of this year's warehouse bleeding out.
Yeah.
We don't have the facilities, I'm afraid. So what you have to come up with is some other way of looking at this that says, okay, well, if we want the high body count, we haven't got the medics, how do we deal with we want this experience to, the team to get better as it goes along. How do we do that? And you do that by investing the teamness, as it were, in the sponsor, rather than in this sort of nebulous... The Trontech 29ers has a sort of nebulous quality of a team, even without worrying about any specific individuals within it. The Trontech 29ers is a thing all on its own. Like a limited company exists as a legal entity.
Yeah.
Lloyd's Bank is a legal entity on its own, even though it's not a person. And Trontech 29ers, I think, works like that. It's the
NFL franchise idea, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a thing that has its own life, character. Yeah. But at the same time, in the illegal version, that's not true. In Extreme, that isn't the case. But what you do have is you have the Warden's team, and the Warden, everybody knows the Warden works in a certain way and has a certain kind of player he puts on the pitch. So people kind of know, and he becomes a character in the same way that the team becomes a character within the league. What you do is you then say, well, if that is what the team is, then that gains experience. He gains power and money and influence as he gets better, and that allows him to bring into his team for the next game more experienced players. So the team you field on your 10th game with the same sponsor will have more experienced and better players, but they won't be the same individuals necessarily that were in the first team.
Yeah.
Now, you could use the same. Obviously, I mean, people will use the same models. Absolutely, it would be crazy for you not to. If you've got a convict guard for game 1 and a convict guard in game 3, then why not use the same model? It may not be the same individual. You can imagine it is if he hasn't got his brain smashed all over the arena. Absolutely, he can be the same guy if he survives, but the chances are he won't survive many games. With somebody who was saying, one of the guys posted yesterday, said, I played the game, it was great. We had 5 deaths and didn't have more than, I think most of the rest of them sounded like they were lying on the floor bleeding by the time they finished. So,
it was against his wife, wasn't it?
That's not necessary. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that was against his wife, and she won.
Yeah.
But as I said, that's not necessarily. That's not with all of the bells and whistles, or even the particularly dangerous players, because some of the as you get more elite teams, obviously you can get more dangerous people who've got more skills and better stats. So the body count, could potentially go up again because the damage output is better than the defensive capacity in Extreme, and there's a bigger gap in Extreme than there is in normal Dreadball. Right. And so if you get someone who buys some very dangerous players, then that can cause quite a few upsets. And of course, if he's busy playing to kill rather than playing to score, that makes a big difference. But we haven't mentioned the fact that there's bits on the board that explode yet.
Yeah, I was going to say. Okay, so we talked about 3 things that are different. Obviously, going back, the very first thing that you said is different is the board. It is the board itself, the arena in which you play, and not only is the fact that it's a different shape. The original Dreadball, that it can change shape. It can be score. As I understand it, scoring zones can be in different parts, and yes, you have obstacles and things that explode.
Yes.
I have to ask, why?
Why not? Well, the health and safety people don't come to the illegal games. So, they basically the people who are running these games want to pull in the punters and fleece them for as much cash as possible. So they put on a show, and the people who are playing the games are clearly desperate and depraved individuals who have nothing to lose. And so if the odd one of them gets blown up, then that just makes for a more fun show. And whereas you're not allowed to blow people's legs off quite so obviously in the main arena, when, small children could be watching, you're entirely encouraged to do so on the illegal circuit. So it's like giving cage fighters chainsaws.
Yes. So basically what we're talking about is that if Major League Dreadball is the start of Rollerball, Dreadball Xtreme is the end of Rollerball.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, it kind of gets... They realise they can get away with it, and they realise that they don't... There's no reason not to. It's one of those things where the people who play, the individuals who play, may or may not have a choice about it. And if they do have a choice, they are paid enough to make them not... to go, okay, well, if I survive, then I'm rich. So I'll give it a go. Or they just don't. I mean, the convicts don't get much option. So, they're there wearing their explosive collars, and they play or they die. So they kind of have no choice. So yeah, I mean, you're talking about people who are playing for very high and somewhat desperate stakes. So the fact that there's things that go bang, it's just another one of the many hazards on the player's trip through the game. But it makes it very different. It makes it quite entertaining because you don't know the effect of these kind of homemade bombs is variable. So you're not quite sure which. Sometimes they don't go off, and sometimes they do. And when they do go off, they go off with a kind of varying degree of danger. So you go, well, do I just use a cheap guy to clear a path, or do I just pile through and hope with my striker carrying the ball, or do I use a guard because he's probably a bit better armoured and more likely to survive? Or you have to think.
Yes, I suppose
I think it's good.
Yeah, I mean, again, going back to that thing of people going, why have I only got 4 actions? Well, actually, if you keep the options open but increase the importance of what you have to do with each action, it therefore makes what the choices of what you do far more important. Yes, as you say, in the same way, I suppose we do things like booby trapping arenas and stuff, and it's although it does kind of add that kind of random chaos into the game,
which again I think is a bit of a crowd pleaser. And I mean, you also have the slight, one less team action count token is a bit of a sort of get on with it, sort of can't hang around, can't shilly-shally. You just got to get on and do whatever it is you're going to do. One other thought about that actually is that the access to cards is a bit greater than it used to be. So you can potentially there are slightly more special move cards around, potentially, if you choose to take them. Because you can get them on fan checks work slightly differently, and you can pick which cards you get. So you could take more of those. If you wanted more actions to run around, you could deliberately pick to take more special action cards, special move cards.
Right. Okay. Right. So we have an arena where things explode, and an arena where things are potentially in different places. So we talked about sponsors and the way that makes Dreadball Xtreme different from Dreadball. What else are we looking at that is different? Now, several things have been noted are slight differences in the rules, slight differences in the way of scoring, for example, with introducing things like dunks, and also slight changes in the way certain player positions, especially the way jacks work. So, yes. Can you tell us about those sorts of changes and why those changes are there?
Most of those changes are to do with how I imagine the game. Kind of this again, it's going to sort of movie in my head, and the difference between how the professionals in the main arena work and how the semi-pros and non-professionals in the Dreadball Xtreme work. So little changes. There's lots of little changes, and I probably won't remember them all. Things like guards don't automatically. The type of armor people wear is per individual player, not per role, because again, in the big arena game, you've got DGB defined armor you're allowed to wear per role, and this is very much set in stone. You haven't got a choice. It's like this. If you're a guard, you have this kind of armor. It's defined. It's like Formula One. They define every single last little bit of how the car can work. So all the cars are very, very much the same. With Extreme, everyone's making their armor out of whatever they can get, and so it's different for everybody. So it just is different for everybody. So the armor is whatever the stat is on that player type, and so each stat line just has a value on it, like the normal stat line does. It's just not the same for every striker, and it's not the same for every jack and so on. It does, however, mean also that the default extra dice for guards goes away. So guard armor, even if you see guard armor at 4+, isn't the same as guard armor normally is. Again, as I said, the defenses aren't quite as good in Dreadball Xtreme. People don't have the money and the resources to get the best armor, even if they were able to get hold of it. So that's one little difference. Jacks have been tweaked to be a bit more balanced with the other player types. A couple of things help them along here. One of them is that you are allowed to dash when you make any movement at all. So even when it's the equivalent of all the jacks having slide, if you know your Dreadball abilities. That's the default. It just basically, that restriction that means you have to have slide to get around it, the restriction goes away.
Right, okay.
So I can step 1 hex and dash if I want to. Also, when you're bringing people onto the pitch, one of the things about the way they organise the game is that there's a sort of automatic gate that stops people coming on when they want. So you can't just put everybody on all the time. You can put a jack on any time you want, but you can only put a striker or a guard on as the first action in your rush. Now, this controls the number of specialists and stops it being a game of Ponzi specialists, which is what the Extreme people don't want. Because one of the things behind Extreme is that although it may actually be a case of criminal underbosses trying to get money and running it like any other kind of racketeering, the ethos behind the movement originally was that a return to the place that Dreadball came from, and sort of back to its grassroots sort of idea, thinking that the game had got over commercialized and lost its way and was kind of spiritually and morally kind of bankrupt because it was all about big sponsorship deals and fancy advertising revenues and getting your star player turning up on the front of the kids' cornflakes packets and all of that nonsense. And it was saying, well, we want to go back to the original kind of way it was on Drop Hangar 91, back on the Battleship Dread, in the good old days. What was it like then? What was the original kind of the rush of the game? Wow, what was it about then? And that's kind of what they're replicating. So they don't want the fancy overtrained specialists. Yeah. So they're kind of marginalising them slightly. So they allow the jacks to come on anytime they want, but they restrict when the strikers and guards can come on. And what that means is that you have to think about your team composition, because you can only bring certain numbers of people on a turn depending on who you've got on the subs bench. Yeah. So that, again, it reflects on who you put on the pitch at the start and when you think people are going to come on and all the rest of it. And so there's interesting sort of changes in the way you play there. So yes, jacks are a bit more useful like that.
Yeah, just doing something like giving them or changing that ability so you can dash even having moved one hex. That makes jacks generally much more mobile and much more of a threat than they ever used to be.
Yes, absolutely. It's not a big change. And in fact, all I'm doing is I'm taking away a restriction. So I'm making it simpler because I don't give it anything to them. I just don't take something away. Mm. So it's very easy to do, very easy to make the change. But it's one of those things where people might not notice. They've played Dreadball and they're used to that. They might not notice the difference. Yeah. Now, when they read it, it might not be pick it up.
Now, I know people have already flagged it. I'm saying, is this something that is liable to find its way back into the original Dreadball game?
Possibly at some point if we do a second edition. One day, maybe in some years' time. I don't think the jacks aren't as balanced in terms of value as I want them to be with the other players. No, they don't quite do what I want them to, or I have in my mind they should do. And I've tried a couple of different ways of making them work, and that aren't in this and aren't in any of the FAQ you haven't seen yet. And so there's various experiments about ways of changing jacks. But this is really just kind of a case of saying, well, let's just do something that we can now, because this is a very straightforward change that I think works very nicely and is actually a simplification of the rules. So I don't know. I mean, will it get backfilled to the other one? Kind of depends. Something. If we do the second edition, then one of the main things I will look to do is rebalancing jacks so that they do more like what I want them to do, and they are more of the option I want them to be. Exactly how that gets done mechanically, I'm not sure, because we've got this and at least two other approaches that we've tried.
Right. Okay.
And it's not that none of the other ones don't work. It's that they're kind of not something to be doing now, if you see what I mean.
Okay, so and I'm sorry we're getting slightly off track from Xtreme and looking at, for example, today, Season 4 of Dreadball was announced, and looking at using the Dreadball Xtreme teams back in the original game of Dreadball. If you have this change in the way that Jacks work with the Xtreme teams, taking that away, if you like, if you go back to standard Dreadball, is that going to unbalance the teams, or do they have to be, or do the teams have to be re-engineered to put them into a normal Dreadball arena?
It's an interesting question. I'm not sure. It's one of those things. How many points is it worth? How much different? If a Jack's worth six credits, how much is he worth if he can slide? Is he worth 7 credits? Is he worth 6.5 credits? I don't know. You know, it's hard to without having my calculator to hand. It's one of those things that's a little bit difficult to gauge as an individual player, and it's more like the way I worked out the original teams, which was as a team. So when I worked out the very first teams for Dreadball in terms of what they had in, I just played against each other, two teams against each other a lot of times until it came out about 50-50 in terms of winning. And it felt like they were very balanced and all the games were very close. And I went, right, well, they're equal teams. Now, how do I work out the points for them?
Yeah.
So I worked out a system of points that gave me those teams coming out like that because I knew that was the right answer. So I kind of worked out the answer first, and I worked out how to get to the answer afterwards.
Right. Okay.
If you see what I mean. Yeah, if you think back to what I was saying about the actual individuals between the different games, it may not be the real Lucky Logan playing in Xtreme. Similarly, it may not actually be the same convicts appearing in the real arena, the big arena. It's not necessarily the same people. It's someone who looks like and is dressed like convicts, but isn't necessarily actually those convicts. They're not necessarily real prisoners. They're people in the orange jumpsuits who look a bit grubby and are wearing shackles. But that's not really, that's kind of for show. It's stage makeup, not necessarily real grime. So whether this is reflected in the stat lines or not, I'm not sure. I would like the stat lines to be the same. But again, they're going to have to be slightly different teams because the nasty surprise cards aren't in normal Dreadball, and you pay for those. They're like buying coaching dice or whatever. So the kind of default team for the convicts in Xtreme has some nasty surprise cards, and so the default team if it was the same default team in normal Dreadball, then they'd have paid for something they can't have because it doesn't exist in that game.
Yeah.
Nor can they really have it because it doesn't make any sense, and they'd be thrown out very quickly for using those tricks. So they have to be slightly rebalanced in order to accommodate that anyway. So as you have to make changes, I think there's no real problem in rebalancing them slightly. They'll just be balanced so they work.
Yeah, and of course you've got the. One would assume you start talking about things like, okay, Digby rules mean that guards would have to have guard armor and what have you. Would that work even with porting the Xtreme teams back into Dreadball? So you'd be still operating.
I think it has to.
Changes?
Yeah, I think you have to because, as I said, you're dealing with, I think they would have to play in that environment. So I think they would have to be kitted out in official gear. So yes, they're going to have the proper guard armor, the proper, and whatever, and they'll default back to the normal rules for Dreadball, which is that if you're a guard, you have this armor. If you're a jack, you have that armor. If you're striker, you have this armor. And that's the only 3 kinds you can have. Keepers aside, but I think you have to stay within that world, that game's world, as it were. You have to say if you're playing in. That's why we're going to need to list them, because we're going to say if you're playing a Dreadball convict team, this is your starting roster. That's what a roster looks like. Yeah. If you're a convict team, if you're playing an Asterian team, an extreme Asterian team, as opposed to a normal Dreadball Asterian team, it looks like this, and it's different from a normal Asterian team. But it's also different from the Xtreme version because it hasn't got any nasty surprise cards. The armor values are different because it has to be to work in that way. Otherwise, you end up with, if you said that the convict team keeps the same stats with the wrong armor values for the role, then it means that basically you're playing extreme on a main arena.
Yeah.
Without the cart, and you end up with this sort of third hybrid, sort of bastardized middle ground version of the thing. I think you need to say if you're playing in the arena, you're playing with arena rules.
Yeah.
They're like this. And if you're playing extreme underground in some grungy little warehouse, you're playing with these rules. And the team you start with, maybe the same models, absolutely use the same models, but the stat line is going to be slightly different because the rules are slightly different, and so it needs to reflect that.
Yeah.
If you buy a set of models, you paint them up, you've got your team, you can use them in both places. It's just they will have very slightly different rules in the different arenas, but I think you're going to bounce from one to the other. You're going to play, a league in one or a league in the other, or a game in one or a game in the other, and you'll just read off the stat line. You just have it in front of you.
Yeah.
I never remember these things anyway. I just read whatever's in front of me.
Yeah. And I suppose the whole thing works vice versa, with the fact that it's already been stated that the idea is that all the current Dreadball races will work inside Extreme as well. And one presumes that you have a similar sort of flip as to what we've just been talking about going the other way.
Yeah, you just have to have a list of what their equivalent stat lines are, and mostly actually the other way from Dreadball to Extreme, there will be less changes because you're talking about individual players. An individual player, a human Jack, will have probably the same stat line. And because the idea is that it's someone who's togged out as a human Jack from the 29ers or whatever, you may even have proper Jack armor. But, that's fine, because you can get armor that's that good without having the real fancy full-on proper stuff, but you can get armor that's that good. It may just not survive more than one game, but then you don't need it to.
Yes,
so anyway, yes, I mean, I think it will be less change going backwards, going sort of from Dreadball to Extreme than there will be going the other way around, because the other way around you're talking about things having to move as whole teams because you do, because that's the way the teams work.
Right. So we've looked at bringing Extreme teams back into Dreadball, and one assumes that is what the Season 4 book covers when that comes out. Okay. So,
yes.
So at the moment, that's aimed at covering 4 teams, which are the 4 that have currently been announced on the Kickstarter. Okay, so we've got Convicts, Asterian Pirates, Mechanites, and the Play or a Mutant team.
Yeah.
Yeah? Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about anything else that's coming, or are you sworn to secrecy?
Nobody swore me to secrecy. There was no Bibles.
And besides, by the time this podcast goes out, you'll probably be another 5 stretch goals down the line anyway.
Oh, quite potentially. Yeah.
Oh yes, that's possible. Yes. Well, who's there? I've got no idea what order any of these are in, and I can't remember which ones actually made it because I've seen so many different concepts, many of which have changed and don't exist anymore. So I'm a bit uncertain about what actually. Which ones actually made it? There's a Forge Father team. There's a different Forge Father team, a Brocker-based Forge Father team. That's quite fun. And the Brockers are sort of the fairly low down the pecking order in terms of sort of caste system within the Forge Fathers. But they're the ones who get to do the sort of the serious at the coalface kind of mining and prospecting. So they're hard as nails, and they are. Hard as nails, uncompromising, very practical, and so yes, that's an interesting little team. Who else was there? I'm sure there were some of the ones I'm thinking of aren't whole teams; they're individuals, which is why I'm getting confused. I do have a list, but it would be cheating to look at the list. Yeah, there's more aliens. There's more various different kinds of humans. There's the mutants and the robots are quite interesting because the models for them have lots of interchangeable parts. So you can get your robot and you can get different, various different legs attached to various different bodies, which attach to various different arms and heads and on. So you can make all sorts of weird and wonderful combinations with them. And because of the modelling restrictions, the Plague isn't quite so variable, but there's still lots of different arms and heads and legs and whatever.
So are they going to have sort of kind of plug and play stat lines to go with the plug and play limbs?
Yes, they are. So yes, you'll buy with a robot, for example, you'll buy a set of legs that's got a certain movement stat, and then buy a body or buy a sort of cortex that's got a certain kind of program for skill, and the arms have got this and that and so on. So yes, you kind of add them together, and they cost different amounts. And as you play with the Meccano set as the robot team, you end up with what usually happens when I do this is you go, wow, this is the most brilliant player ever. He's 37 mega credits to put on the pitch. Damn, but he's good though. He's really good. And you go, well, maybe I actually need to think a bit more about that and have somebody slightly more practical. But yeah, plugging all the best bits in is a amusing hobby. But the modelling, I think I've not seen. Obviously the real ones don't exist yet, but I've seen a lot of the renders, and they're going to be loads of fun to put together. The Plague are being made traditionally, so I've seen the real models of those and all sorts of bits of those on.
As in the same way as the Plague in Dead Zone.
Sorry, in what way?
In same kind of cast sculpts where they glue together. I was going to say I have to confess that my Dead Zone Kickstarter is still in the box. So. No, when I said sculpted traditionally, I mean kind of in green stuff and Procreate and Sculpey or whatever it is they're using these days, rather than CAD. Which robots is perfect for CAD. Absolutely.
Because it's all hard edges and so on. So they're being done like that, which means that I've seen the physical models of the Plague, and seen the sort of combinations to mix and match with sort of Zor heads and Dreadball arms on Plaguey bodies and all sorts of very strange-looking creatures in the end. But fun, but very entertaining. Sort of sitting and playing with the different parts to see what you can make. And I think some of the artwork shows that quite nicely. But yes, sort of mix and match people and mix and match robots. Who else was there? There's lots of one-off aliens who you can use to spice up and add particular features to teams. So if your team's like we got the Asterians, not so good at thumping people, but there's 2 or 3 really good hitty individual characters, which is kind of the equivalent of MVPs in Extreme, is basically a player that there is only one of, rather than the player type.
Yeah.
So if you say a convict guard who's a Grogan, there's lots of Grogans, so you can have any number of those you want. But if you get this particular individual MVP equivalent, then they're somebody else. You just have to work out how much you're going to cost to pay for them. But there's only one of them. You can't have lots. Although, again, I could have one and you could have one. You get the same thing that, is it really Lucky Logan? This whole sort of imposter. He's a famous person within the circuit, within the Extreme circuit. So there's people pretending to be him as well. So, yes.
Yeah.
Anyway, yes, my memory is, sorry, it's the end of a long day. My memory is sort of given up on which teams there are.
I would say, is there anything in the Warpath Dead Zone universe that hasn't actually made it into Dreadball yet?
There's a whole lot of things from the Rebels. I mean, certainly like a Rebel team. I know Rebel team's been mentioned, and also the other thing I was thinking of because we've been promised giants, haven't we? Or more giants, shall we say?
Yes, there will be more giants, and most of the things that you see in the Rebel team are appearing in DBX, including one of my favourites, which is the Chobar.
Oh yes.
Floating jellyfish psychic.
Yes.
Ho ho ho.
Yes.
The mind boggles.
Indeed, and again,
I do like the Chobar.
Yes, it does look quite nice. I mean, the obviously there's a lot of talk about crossover between, especially when you start looking at a lot of the Dreadball Xtreme stuff and crossing over potentially into Dead Zone, and I know people have been talking about is there going to be opportunity to do conversion sprues so you can put the models from DBX into Dead Zone and all that sort of thing. And I suppose all this starts to become possible with the way you're operating within within the universe.
Well, all Dreadball Xtreme, Warpath, Project Pandora are all in the same universe.
Yeah,
Dead Zone. It's all one universe, and so if there's a race that exists in one of them, then it exists in the other ones. Even if it's only standing in the crowd waving, there's still Chovar in Dreadball.
Yeah,
somewhere. They may not be on the pitch. They may be referees. Who knows? But they're all in there. And so similarly, anything we get that comes in, anything that turns up as a Dreadball character, could then turn up in Dead Zone, could then turn up in Warpath, and so on. It's just a case of working through, because all of the games are looking at the same universe from a different angle, a different perspective, and there's that naturally that each perspective shows up certain things in a different light, and certain things come in into focus that other ones won't necessarily notice. So it may be that certain races will appear in one and not another, but there's no reason that they all exist in each other's in all the games. It's just a matter of whether any are kind of pertinent to the way in which each one develops. Certainly see there's a lot of modelling opportunity.
Oh yeah, certainly. Yeah.
I've been pondering through while you've been talking. It was rather amusing me, which is you've got in the Dreadball universe, you've got this whole thing between the squeaky clean, organised Dreadball and the bare knuckle fighting down the East End Dreadball Xtreme. And clearly, there's a it's going to pull some viewers one way and some viewers the other. There's sort of an amusing little parallel potentially in the actual gaming world here. And how do you think people are going to play both? People are going to prefer one. People are going to prefer the other.
I think you'll get a mixture. I think you'll get both. You'll get some people prefer one, some people prefer the other. Some people will play either or neither or both. It's some people drink Pepsi, some people drink Coke, some people don't care as long as it's brown and fizzy. I don't drink either, so there's 4 possible options, and I think we'll get all of them. I don't think it's something that both ends appeal. I mean, the Dreadball main arena game, the first Dreadball game, is slicker and requires it's less complicated, not so much because there's a couple of extra rules to deal with how the traps work in Dreadball Xtreme, but it's what you have to think about in Dreadball Xtreme that's more complicated. There's more stuff to consider. Not a lot more, but there's a noticeable amount more thinking to be done. So I can see that appealing to some people and being sort of off-putting to others. And, it's like any other choice you make. You just have to say, well, we wanted one of the main core differences to be that there is a mutable variable board with stuff on it. And as soon as you do that, you add all of the thinking time about navigating round the stuff that's in the way, and the fact that the board is mutable between games. So, this is a sort of natural fallout of our decision to do this, and you just go, okay, fair enough. There's a choice. You pick one or you pick another. There's a number of games that have different versions and so on. It's like playing. I played a lot of Squad Leader, and some people prefer playing in one sort of environment. Some people play another. I mean, if you think of something like Flames of War. Some people like Russian Front, some people like Normandy, some people prefer the sort of North African campaign, and they're all different subtly because of the sorts of things you get, but they're all part of the same kind of, the same world and the same meta event, as it were. But yeah, we'll get the lot, we'll get the whole spectrum.
I personally, I think I'll see myself still drifting towards the original game. One of the things I really like, and I guess that not having had a chance to do more than look through the extreme rules is probably early to say. The thing I really, really like about Dreadball itself is how quickly, once you know what you're doing, the mechanics go away. and stop being something that you bother about, and you wind up just playing the game. And that's one of the things I really like about Dreadball.
I don't think you'll find it very much different with Xtreme, to be honest. I mean, anything that is involved in terms of teams, of course, that's all decided. When you're playing a game, you've just got whatever's on your roster. So it doesn't matter how you got there. You've just got a roster to look at. So there's not so much that's different in terms of the amount of rules you have to remember on the pitch. I mean, it's a dice roll at the moment because we haven't got the models, or you won't have the models. But when you do the obstacles, for example, the small obstacles, the ones that are trapped, they are little crates with lids that come off, and underneath of the lid tells you what it does. So you don't have to remember anything. It's just the first person who moves next to something, set it off, you pick up the lid, you look at what it is, and it says it goes bang with 5 dice. So you roll 5 dice. It's very simple.
Oh, right. So in the same way as the objective counters work in Dead Zone at the moment?
Yes, exactly the same way. Because we've just thought, well, it requires no thinking. It's just dead simple. It's really, really fast. And then the ones that have gone off that were duds, you just leave the lids off. The ones that go bang, you take off completely. But you can see very quickly, you just pick up the lid, and it's got either it's blank and nothing happens, it's a sort of flash symbol with nothing in it, which means it's a sort of pop and goes off and you get knocked over, but you don't get hurt. Or it's a flash with 3, 4, or 5 in, which is the number of dice you roll for the slam, which is the sort of shockwave hitting you.
Yeah. And
that's it. That's all you have to do. So the whole of that rule, in terms of adding to the RAM needed to deal with the rules weight, that's it. There's nothing really to it. There's very, very little that is additional complexity during a game that is complexity because it's more rules. The complexity tends to be, as I said, because you're given more options and you have more things to consider. So it's a case of choices, and more choices always takes a little longer to think about. But yes, I know what you mean about it. The rules kind of go away quite quickly, and I do my best to design games like that because it means that I can probably have a fighting chance of remembering what I'm supposed to be doing, and can get on with playing the game and not fighting people over what the rules might mean.
Okay, so we are at the point where the beta rules have been released, and obviously you've spent much of the last day going through questions and typing up FAQs and what have you. And we are, something like 20 days or so left in the Kickstarter itself. So so as far as that's concerned, where are we going from here? Or is it again one of these things of, at the moment it's too difficult to say simply because of the beast that is Kickstarter? Obviously, Mantic have got targets on what they like to do depending on how much funding they get, and obviously that's the way these things go. But as far as you're concerned, whereabouts are you in this whole Xtreme development process?
Well, in terms of, there's two things. One of them is where I've got to the point where I've got the core of the game done, and so I know the game works. I've played the game enough. I've played the game with Ronnie and the guys at Mantic, so we're all happy that the game works and it's a fun game and it's different from Dreadball, and it's a worthwhile thing to do. So we all happy with that.
Yeah.
Once you've decided that that's the case, the core is basically, there's all sorts of bells and whistles and fine tunings to be done, but the core basically works. That's when you go to Kickstarter and you say, right, now we need the money to produce this, and there's not really much point in me developing 6 expansions if we only get funded for none. So I'm just waiting to see what happens, to see how much I need to do, because it's just a waste of my time. There's plenty of other things I could be doing without, that I know are going to get published. So I've got loads of Mars Attack stuff to get on with, so I can be doing that while I'm waiting to see what happens with this Kickstarter.
Yeah.
In terms of what we're going to talk about on Kickstarter, the first version of the beta, and in fact the new version is just several days ago when you hear this, but right now as I speak, the version I've been working on the updates for all day has just gone live. So that's kind of the second iteration of the beta.
Oh, okay.
That's basically a way of saying, here is what it looks like on the pitch. Don't worry about picking a team. Here's a team. Take the team like that, and just try playing it, and you'll find out how it works on the pitch, and you'll see for yourself what the differences are and how it feels different, and the different kind of tactics you have to think about, and so on. And that's the starting point. That's what you say. You want people to be playing it, and just getting on the table and trying it out for themselves and seeing what they find. And that's the first step. The next step, once we've done that for a bit, is to start introducing people to more different teams. As the teams come out, we can put up stats for them, and we can sort of say, well, here's extra different teams. See how you do with these. And also we can talk about the team building and team the sponsors and so on, how they work, because the whole load of stuff for leagues that we've not talked about, for example, about betting and the way the money works and so on within an extreme league. So there's a lot of stuff to talk about around that sort of topic that because we've got 3 and a bit weeks or whatever it is we've got left, there's no point in trying to get all of it out at once. I think it's much more helpful to talk about how the game works as once it's on the table kind of concept. Because that's the core of it, after all. Is some people will never worry about how you do the fine-tuning of teams. They'll just want to play one-off games. That's the core of it. That's the core of the process.
Yeah.
So we've got a few days left because the rules only went up yesterday. So people haven't, most people haven't played. Some people are playing tonight. Some people will be playing tomorrow. People might get a game at weekend. It's the first time they have the chance to play. So I think we've got a few days, maybe a week worth of talking around that, just to get everyone understanding what the real message is, really, because it's hard to give the whole message and then for that to sort of sink in and, what is the implications of only having 4 actions, not 5, or what are the implications of people not coming off the board when they're injured? What does this mean? And really the only way to find out is to play it. So once we've got the more people who get to play it, the more we start getting a different kind of conversation about, rather than just I tell you the exciting thing, you tell me whether you like the sound of it or not. Then we get, I've showed you the rules, you get a chance to read it, then we can talk about that level. And then really, once we make it, the next step is you play it, I've played it, now we can have another conversation.
Yeah.
And then once we've had that conversation, then everybody who hasn't had a chance to play it gets to hear the comments of people who are playing it fresh, who aren't Mantic staff, who are just people who like them, who've just seen it and so on. So it tells a different message, it tells a different story, and it gives people more information and different kind of information for them to actually be able to make a judgment on about whether it sounds like a game they want to be involved in or not. So we've got, I think, a week, maybe, I don't know, we'll take these things with Kickstarter sort of as they come, but perhaps a week just to give people the time to go through the process of absorbing the rules on, for playing the game and getting, maybe getting a game in themselves. And then we'll look at a whole slew of stuff about teams and how teams and sponsors interact. So yes, there's lots of stages to the process, but I think people just need a little bit of time. You can't drop everything on people all at once, otherwise it just gets confusing.
Yeah. So if I asked you how betting worked, would you be able to tell me?
I can tell you how it works. I've written the rules for it.
I was just wondering whether it's a case of you, from a point of view of actually talking. So, well, no, we're not actually talking about that for.
I'm quite happy to discuss that. I mean, I'm not going to give people the rules for it yet, but I don't mind talking about it. I mean, there's two kinds of betting. Betting only really matters in the league game because it's about money, and in a one-off game you just go, okay, Neil, here's your team, I've got my team, we'll play a game. The money doesn't really come into it. It doesn't matter what you win at the end because we've only played a one-off game, so winning lots at the end is immaterial. Same with betting. It doesn't matter if I win or I lose because I win some money and then we've only played a one game, so it doesn't matter. So money, betting, leagues are all interrelated.
Yeah.
If I'm playing in a league, what happens is I'm a sponsor. I have to come up with a team with a minimum price value and a minimum number of players to be able to play in a game. That will cost me a certain amount of money. And so I put together whatever I want for my team, turn up, play the game. And when I'm playing the game, we'll get paid a certain amount for putting on a show, basically. You get paid a certain amount for turning up and providing a team for the game. And this is your bread and butter for buying the next game's team. Yeah?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's your core value for your money. So you can always say, if you get 50, if it costs you at least 50 to buy a team, if you get at least 50 back, then you're in the same place you were. So you can always field a team.
Yeah.
That's fine. You can always field a team for the next game. However, if you can buy, when you're buying your team, you hire players, you buy cards, you buy coaching dice, all of that kind of stuff. So you build your team with a combination of things you think is going to be helpful. Once you've done all that, you might have some money left. Now, if you've got some cash left, or you've saved some cash, you can use that to bet. And what you do is you buy betting chips, as it were. These will cost a certain amount of money, like there's a price for a card or a price for a coaching dice. You buy betting chips, and you can bet on. If you've seen the board, there's a little thing on the bottom left as you face the board that's basically where you place your betting chips.
Ah, right.
And so you bet on, you bet on whether you're going to win, whether you're going to do 3 or more casualties, whether you're going to do 6 or more casualties, or whether you're just going to do more casualties than the other person. And you place your chips at the beginning, and they just sit there throughout the game. And at the end, whichever ones are true, give you the value that it said. So if it costs you 5 to buy a betting token, and I can't remember what they are actually, but if it says doing more casualties than the opponent gets you 10, then there you go. If I do 3 casualties and you do 2, I get 10 credits at the end on top of whatever I get for just turning up.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very simple betting rules. In addition to that, during a game, every rush, the first thing I do in my rush is I place my sponsor. He does one of 3 schemes. One scheme helps me, one scheme nobbles you, and the third scheme is about betting. The third scheme is an additional bet that I will win. Now, what this does is it says you can't bet on different things. You can only bet during the game. You can only put a side bet on that you're going to win.
Yeah.
But again, there's no point in playing this scheme if you're just doing a one-off game, because it's about money, and money doesn't matter in one-off games. But in leagues, you might think, oh, actually, I could just make a few more, but I don't really need the other ones at the moment. I can make a bit more money. So what you do is you say, I'm betting I'm going to win. That's what my sponsor's doing, is going off and putting a side bet. And this doesn't cost you any cash, which is one nice thing, because it's part of the running cost of your team. What it does do, however, is it gives you a little token that says 1, 2, or 3. And if you are currently winning, when you bet that you're going to win, you get a 1. If it's currently a draw, you get a 2. If you're currently losing, when you bet that you're going to win, you get a 3.
Right.
And these sit in the win token. You put these in the win token, in the win bet, in the bit you bet that you're going to win, in that box. Yeah. It just sits there till the end. So let's say at the beginning of the game I bought a betting chip, I put it on that I'm going to win, and during the game, as the scores went back and forwards, I got 2 2s and a 1. If I win the game, I get the winning value printed on the board, plus the 2 2s and a 1, an extra 5.
Yeah.
For having put side bets on during the game. So it's a way of upping your overall winnings, but at the cost of actually influencing the game during play. Okay. So as I said, it's actually not complicated. It's an additional thing that you only need in leagues, because leagues are the only time the money matters.
Yeah. Well, As we said, Jake, at the moment, from what we've seen so far, and from what you told us this evening, it's, as you say, it sounds really interesting. As I say, it's Dreadball, but not quite. Or it seems to be quite a different game. I must admit, I'm quite looking forward to seeing where we go with it.
Absolutely. I mean, who knows? This, as I said, it's Kickstarter is a very, very strange beastie indeed.
Having said that, though, if you look at your track record with the last 5 of them, or 4 of them if you don't count Loca, since you weren't that wasn't yours, you wouldn't be able to make a reasonable prediction as to how much more work you're going to have to do before the end of the Kickstarter, surely.
Well, yes and no. I mean, the last one I did was Mars Attacks, and that had a stage of going backwards, which was rather unnerving, to say the least, because you think, well, once it starts sliding backwards, you go, what on earth are we doing wrong? Because the people who thought it was a good idea, who said they pledged a week ago, are suddenly deciding it's not a good idea anymore. And what have we done that's made them change their mind? Or is there just something else that's come on? Because AVP came on partway through that, which didn't help. And, so that there's always that where you think, well, what is going to happen? And you've all seen things like, Gates of Antares just strangle itself in the middle of the process. And there is always this very slow bit in the middle of a Kickstarter campaign. You start with a big fanfare, and it ends when everyone's scrambling for as much as they can fit, because they know that there's you get what you get. The deal you get is. I remember going to Ronnie when I was looking at when he first showed me the Mars Attacks thing, and I said, have you done your sums right? Do you realise what you're giving away here? And, it was something ridiculous, like 3.5 times the value for one of the things. It was just like, what? But yeah, I mean, people will naturally, try and get the bargains at the end, but it's the middle bit. It's this funny bit in the middle where you're trying to explain what you're doing, and you're really needing to get to an audience that hasn't heard it already. Because you've got the people who heard all the teaser trail, came in, knew what you were talking about, maybe seen Dreadball or seen Dead Zone or something, and they go, oh, well, we like that, so we'll come in for this one as well. So you get that initial hit, and then you've told everybody you know. So who do you tell now? How do you say, come and join our happy band? How do you persuade new people who haven't heard? It's a difficult thing, and I think it's not just us that come across this by any stretch. But I think in some ways we're almost victims of our own success, because I think Mantic's got very good at doing this initial teasing campaign and so on, and getting the word out there and doing the big splash launch. And then it's almost like, well, everybody who was going to do it's jumped in already. But it won't be like that, because people still are joining now. People will, some people will wait until the rules come out, so they won't go join until yesterday. Then other people will wait until the rules come out, and they'll pledge $1 and take the rules and see how they play and have a go, and that's great. I mean, I think I'm very happy with people taking it and playing it and finding out if they like it, because then I'd rather have people buying it and liking it than buying it and being grumpy because they felt they got something they didn't want. I think you don't design things for people to be upset by, but you want people who like them to play them.
Absolutely. I mean, to be honest, I chickened out of the original Dreadball Kickstarter. I was sat there loaded up with $150 worth of pledge, and then caught a sideways look from my wife and changed my mind. But and I'll bet I'm not the only one either. But I'm giving Xtreme some quite serious thought. I'm one of the people who tends to go late.
There's always it's like when you run a convention or when you're running a tournament. There's always someone whose kid's sick, who's just getting divorced, whose parents die, or there's always someone who some horrible life event happens to that just causes like you would expect, and quite reasonably you go, well, toy soldiers gaming goes, that's on hold. I'm sorting out real world. People lose their jobs, people they get all sorts of horrible things, real world things happen, and that means they can't spend the money on toy soldiers, or can't come and play when you try and arrange a game with someone. It just happens in a microcosm all the time. But absolutely, I think if it appeals to you, then absolutely, I'd say go for it. But don't just jump in on a spare. I mean, look at it. Get the game. Get a game. Play it. That's why we put up the beta rules, so people can play it and find out if they like it or not, and get enthused and excited. And it's why you provide all the pictures of the toy soldiers, all the renders, all the artwork, all of this, just to say this is what it is. Don't take our word for it. This is what you get. Here's the rules. Go away and play it.
Indeed.
Come back. Tell us what you think.
The only thing I have noticed is that you do seem to be getting people levelling the accusation that Kickstarter is becoming a bit more a pre-order system than actually a Kickstarter for some of the Mantic things nowadays.
Well, I think you get people saying this, but I think people say this because they don't realise how much this costs to do. I mean, Mantic have already spent a great deal of money on getting it to this level. But if they, the commercial realities of producing games, or anything else for that matter, are not fun, especially in this climate. If you wanted to say, if Kickstarter wasn't there, you have to find the money to go and print everything up front, which is tens or hundreds of, in this case, hundreds of thousands of dollars, because the prices some of the Kickstarters Mantic have run have cost more to the company to make than they've made on the Kickstarter. They've lost money on the Kickstarters. So, we're not talking, they're not just sitting there and buying another villa in Acapulco on the proceeds. This is money that goes to paying for steel tools and money that goes for printing and shipping tens of thousands of copies of things. So it's not, essentially it's a pre-order. It allows a company to print what it knows it can sell. So it takes away some of the risk. You don't have to suddenly find you've got 10,000 copies of something nobody wants. If you do it on Kickstarter, you can say, well, we're doing it this way. What about this? And if people go, no, we're not interested, you go, okay, well, we won't do that then. And you don't waste all your money. You don't then have a company that's got half its assets tied up in dead stock that it can't shift. Then it has to pulp it. Dreadfully. Whoops. Traditionally, what you used to do is you'd get a bunch of money together from somewhere. People used to do this with redundancy money or with loans from banks or what have you. You get a bunch of money from somewhere. Let's say it's cost you 30 grand to print and produce 3,000 copies of your board game. Right? Cost you $10 a board game. So you get 3,000 copies, cost you 30,000. And until you have sold probably 2/3 of that, you won't have your money back to do the next game. And if your game happens to sell slowly, then what happens is you've got your spare room is full of this game, which you can't sell, and you haven't got any money to do anything else because it's all tied up in the dead dock, and then you just die. I mean, Incursion I don't know if you remember what happened to Incursion. When Incursion came out, and they did the first expansion, and then there was an incident where when he had all this stock and he wasn't shifting it at any kind of useful rate, so he had a sale, and he then almost immediately he did it. I think it was a crazy 50% off sale or something, and everybody wanted it at 50% off, and then he put this letter out that says I'm stopping the sale. Because if everybody buys my whole stock of 50%, and I've got no money left to make anything else, and I go, well, that isn't, it's his fault for being daft in the first place. He shouldn't have said that. He should have thought about what happens if everybody buys it. But at the same time, I understand entirely the position he's in, because he's not got lots of assets. He's not a big company. He's just done this one thing, and he wants to carry on building on that. But that's the old-fashioned way of doing it. You are utterly screwed if something goes wrong in the process. And it did for him. So Kickstarter, and as I would have liked his company and the interesting things he was doing to carry on and do more, because as a gamer, I thought he was doing interesting stuff. Now, Kickstarter, if he'd kickstarted it, he would have been able to do more interesting stuff. So as far as I'm concerned, Kickstarter, whatever you call it, whether you call it pre-order system or not, is a system that allows you to make things which you know you can sell and avoids the problem of having loads of dead stock that eats your company assets and basically kills the company dead in the water. If you want people not to be dead in the water, then as a gamer, I would say Kickstarter's a big thumbs up.
The other thing I had noticed in what you were saying is, which I think people might have been missing, is that one thing that Kickstarter gives you over just a straight "tell us if you buy this" is the interactivity.
Oh yes, I mean it builds a community so that when the game lands on your shelf, you know there are 1,000 people, 2,000, 5,000, whatever, in forums on the internet who can talk about this, who are excited about this, who are involved in this, and you have an instant community. But I think when people talk about pre-orders, it being a pre-order system, they're talking about money, and I think it's one of those things where people don't realise how much of a boon to the survivability of a games company this Kickstarter is. I'm not talking. I mean, even the smaller the company, the more this is a help. But this is not. Mantic isn't a huge company. They certainly couldn't afford to be doing. It would be if they had to fund all of these things, all of these games in advance on their own. We wouldn't be having this conversation for 3, 4, or 5 years. Because that's how much time Kickstarter short circuits. Kickstarter accelerates the development of these things enormously because we say, we've got this year's worth of product, who wants what? There you go, right, we're now making, this is the next year's worth of product, we now know we're making it. We know we can sell it, we know we've got this many sales. And then obviously you can carry on selling it afterwards, but that is something that gives you your funding to go and do it in the first place. And if people say, I mean, with the Kings of War Kickstarter, and with all of them, but a particular example with the Kings of War Kickstarter was that Ronnie thought Heroes were going to be popular, and they weren't popular, but something else, I can't remember where was I, something else was popular, but he didn't think was going to be, so they just shifted what they were doing. If they hadn't had it on Kickstarter, then it would have been a case of they'd produce a whole load of stuff that people didn't want and not produce stuff that people did want. So, yes, that helps Mantic, obviously helps the company that's doing it, but it also helps the people who are playing the games because they get what they want instead of what they don't want. So I just think Kickstarter's great. I mean, I think it works. It works to help everyone, really. And if only the HMRC didn't get in the way of my getting American ones, then I'd be fine. We love customs.
Oh, don't we all?
Yeah.
No.
But I mean, for me, that's what stops me buying. 9 out of 10 American games I look at, American Kickstarters I look at, I don't buy because of the shipping and customs. And there's I just go, well, I just can't afford all of that extra money, and then 6 weeks trying to work out where the hell customs have hidden it, and all the rest of it.
Yeah, you just know you're going to get hit, don't you? So it's
absolutely, and that's protectionist government policies for you. Hooray!
And that's a whole other podcast.
Yeah, that is indeed a whole other podcast. Yes,
indeed.
Anyway, so yes, slightly off topic, just a tiny bit.
Okay, have we covered everything? I think we have, haven't we? Jake?
Probably. I think so. Yes.
Is there anything you feel you haven't told us?
I can't remember. The problem is, I don't, it's hard to know what you don't know. You see what I mean? Okay. It's always easier if someone asks because then I can tell them. But I'm going to say you really need to play it because then when you've played it, I mean, I can tell you till I'm blue in the face that it plays differently. You have to think differently to win. But until you've done it, it doesn't really make sense. Yeah, if you've played it, then you know what I mean. But until I mean, everybody who comes in a Kickstarter tells you what amazing, innovative, slick, marvelous, perfect piece of genius they've created. And frankly, I don't believe them because everybody says it, and everybody can't be right because I've seen an awful lot of things that people said were slick, marvelous works of genius that frankly weren't. So I don't see why everybody believes me either. I just assume people really want to play it, and that's I know that if they play it, they will find it very different from Dreadball, and quite interesting. I think interestingly different. But you have to play it first to find out, to really know, to really believe. That's why the rules are up there.
Yeah.
Do take them and find out for yourself. Come and tell me what you think. Most people like it so far. A few grumbles.
Great stuff. Okay, well, Jake, thank you for your time this evening. It's been, as always, it's been great to speak to you. Look forward to being in touch soon. I suppose if not before, I'll probably end up catching up with you at Salute, and hopefully we can have a quick chat about how things have gone and how things have progressed. Obviously, by then we'll know how everything's panned out, and we can catch up then.
I shall see you at Salute, doing your reporter duties, I imagine.
Indeed, yes.
I'll be slaving over a participation game.
Yes.
Okay, so...
Well, thank you, folks. Thank you for having me.
As I say, Jake, it's been great to have you. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you. Thank you both.
The Meeples and Miniatures podcast is very happy to be sponsored by Coat d'Arms Paints. Now, Coat d'Arms have been supporting miniatures painters with their products for well over 20 years in some way, shape or form. Their current range is 150 sets of acrylic paint, which are available both as individual colours, but also in paint sets depending on period. Things such as the Ancients paint set, the World War II German, World War II American, World War II Russian paint sets. And they also include things like an ACW set and even a Horsetown set. That's one way to purchase your paints. And they also do triads. Now, if you're a fan of the 3-colour system, made famous by the likes of people like Kevin Dallimore, you may like to purchase your paints with a dark shade, a medium shade and a highlight. And the triad system from Coat d'Arms allows you to do this. They also have ranges of textured paints called Brushscape, which allow you to paint textures onto bases as well as colour. And these are ideal especially for smaller scale models. And if you're a fan of the dip method of painting, then Coat d'Arms have their own product available called Super Shader. This is available in light brown, dark brown and black. Coat d'Arms Paints have a whole range of products available to try. Check them out at www.blackhat.co.uk and be sure to tell them that we sent you.
Thanks to Jake once again for being on the show. I hope you found that chat interesting and informative. If you're interested in looking at Dreadball Xtreme, the Kickstarter runs until Sunday, March the 16th. And as of this point in time, they've just announced some new changes. So they'll be releasing details of some new teams, which we didn't get to chat about with Jake, but things like a Crystalline team, a Rebel team, and a Spire team will all be added to the Kickstarter in the next couple of days. Also, rather interestingly, they've just added a deluxe original Dreadball pitch. So that's exactly the same material as the multiplayer Dreadball pitch, but it's just the original pitch. I think a lot of people may be interested in that as a replacement for the board that comes in the original game. As we said, that sort of thing that they've done is it's the same thing they've used for material they use for the Dead Zone boards. Really good stuff, and certainly something I'm interested in. As far as Dreadball Xtreme itself is concerned, on the whole, I really like the look of the game. I have a couple of reservations. I'm not a great fan of the extra chaos being added by the traps. Some people view that as fun. I must admit I'm not particularly one of them. So for me, that's more of a reservation as opposed to adding something to the game. But that said, on the whole, I think it's a different enough game, certainly to give it and make it worth a look. And especially, as I've got everything from Dreadball anyway, it's an ideal companion piece. And even if you end up in a situation where you only pick up effectively the base set of the game, with everything you can put in from Dreadball, there's an awful lot to go at, even before you consider many of the extra teams. In the meantime, if you just Google Dreadball Xtreme Kickstarter, you'll get the link, and go take a look. The beta rules are available to download, although they are from the Mantic digital site, which you have to register for. I know some people have complained about that. But just to warn you, that's what you've got to do in order to get a hold of the digital rules. In the meantime, once again, thank you very much for listening. Always appreciate any feedback. What's left to say, happy gaming, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to the Meeples and Miniatures podcast. If you want to know more about Meeples and Miniatures, there are several things you can do. First of all, you can visit the website at www.meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. If you want to contact the show at all, you can email me at neil@meeplesandminiatures.co.uk. You can follow the show on Twitter. Simply look for M&M Podcast, or click the follow us on Twitter button from the website. We also have a group on Facebook. That's the Meeples and Miniatures Podcast Fan Club. Again, follow the link from the website. And finally, if you want to help us to support the show, you can always donate to the podcast by clicking the PayPal button on the donate page, again found on the website. Once again, thank you for listening. I hope you've really enjoyed the show. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.